Hi, everyone. Today we're going to look at 1 Timothy chapter 2. And 1 Timothy chapter 2 is kind of a short chapter. It's only 15 verses, but it's got a lot in it, doesn't it? And before we get in here, I just want to remind you again that most of Paul's letters are written for a reason. He's usually writing them to address a problem. In this case, train a leader in the church about some problems. And in chapter 1, he specifically is centering on false teaching. And remember, when Paul wrote this, it wasn't divided into chapters. It was just one letter. And so Paul talks about false teachers, and then he goes right into prayer, the importance of prayer and intercession. And of course, one of the important parts of this was to pray against the false teaching. Now Paul says, you're not only supposed to pray for your family, those you have contact with, but he said, make sure that you pray for the government leaders who rule over you. He understood that those leaders that govern over us make decisions that affect our life. So we should be praying for these government officials, these leaders, that God would give them discernment to judge situations rightly. That he would help them see through deceptions or maybe prejudice in their own life so they can see things correctly. I hope you can see that just complaining about government isn't going to do much. But prayer can have an influence. Praying for someone can have an influence, asking God to pour out his Spirit. I've many times asked God to give government leaders a Christian advisor, for example, like a Daniel, that could speak truth into their life. Anyway, Paul says, don't forget to vote for government leaders because that'll help you to live a quiet and peaceful life in Jesus Christ. And he said, while you're praying for them, make sure you don't forget to pray for their salvation. In John chapter 3, John tells us that God so loved the world, that Jesus came and died. When you pray for a government official that you may not agree with some of their political decisions, it really reminds you the value of a soul. That person, even though you disagree, pretty heavily in what they're doing and how they're doing it, Jesus died for them, and they need salvation. So this passage teaches us that the gospel is for everyone. It's for everyone, regardless of race, regardless of political belief, and so forth. In verse 4, Paul says something. He says, when you pray for someone, you want to pray for their salvation and that they come to the knowledge of the truth. Now, this is interesting because it tells us that to become a Christian, you have to understand some key truths. You can't become a Christian just because your parents were one, or because your parents brought you up at infant baptism and had them sprinkle some water over you. That doesn't make you a Christian. That doesn't make you born again. To become born again, become a Christian, there's certain key things you have to remember. For example, you have to admit you're a sinner. You have to admit that Jesus died for your sins, that the sins in your life cause a separation between you and God, so on and so forth. And I think that's important. And in verses 8 through 11, kind of start getting to the touchy parts here, a touchy element of this that people misunderstand. And Paul's talking about a woman's overindulgence in clothing, jewelry, using her sexuality to get attention or to get her way, maybe. And to get attention through her physical appearance and dress. Now, I don't know how big of a problem that is in the church. It is some, but people ask me, what should you tell ladies on how to dress? And I simply say, just tell any man or woman Dress as you would if Jesus was coming over for dinner. You know what I mean? If Jesus himself was coming over for dinner, how would you dress? Because women can't be ultimately responsible for what that man is thinking over there. You know what I mean? So you can't put all the blame on some guy's immoral thoughts on the woman. So Paul says that women are to just be careful how they dress modestly. And I would say that includes the guys. But I got to tell you, it does surprise me sometimes. Just add this in. It does surprise me sometimes what people will wear to church. Let's go to verses 11 through 15, because this part of these 15 verses is probably the most misunderstood. And it's used by people who hate Jesus to try to convince them that Christianity is prejudiced against women. Now, I gave a study on 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and I said that the main subject that Paul is addressing there is spiritual authority in the church, and it's the same thing here. I believe Paul is addressing the importance of spirituality in the church, spiritual authority in the church, and ultimately spiritual authority in the family. When we go to chapter 3 tomorrow, you'll see that Paul talks about leadership in the church. And he says basically two things. He says the leaders with the spiritual authority, the ultimate spiritual authority in the church, are to be men. Didn't say all authority, but the spiritual authority in the church should be men. And secondly, here are the qualifications that they have. It does not mean that women can't have a spiritual authority in the church. A lot of them do. It's the ultimate spiritual authority. Now, the Greek word here, exercise authority or have master over in the church, the Greek word is authenteo. It means exercise authority, have master over. In other words, be the ultimate authority in the church. Paul is saying he does not allow women to speak in the church and say things or be the final authority, have mastery over the church. The local congregation. When you understand this, I think you can see it doesn't mean that women aren't supposed to ever say anything. Because if you read through the New Testament, you can see that they were saying things. Priscilla, Romans 16. Eutycha, Seneca, Philippians 4, 2-3. There's three women there. And then and Paul refers to them as fellow laborers. Philip had daughters who were prophets. You can't prophesy if you don't say something. I guess you could use sign language, but okay. So it's not that Paul is anti-woman. He's simply addressing spiritual authority. That Greek word there, authenteo, the one with ultimate authority, the one who has the one who exercises authority over a local church. Okay, that's what he's talking about. I'm going to use Justice Amy Coney Barrett as an example. Here's a woman who has incredible authority, right? In the government, in our country. But she's a Christian, and she absolutely believes that her husband has a spiritual authority in her household. She's a Catholic. She believes that her priest has spiritual authority in her life. She goes to that priest or her husband to speak spiritual things into her life, okay? And so here you have a woman with incredible authority in the culture, but understands God's spiritual authority in the home and in the church. And I don't know about you, but she's a real inspiration to me. I am so glad that she's on the Supreme Court, and I think you can see now why liberals and those who hate God just can't go crazy when they think about that a woman like this is on the Supreme Court. Anyway, I hope that brought some clarity to you. God bless you, and see you tomorrow.